Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what will hopefully be the first in a new series on KQ2, exploring high and low in St. Joe with Sam Rowe. In this series, we'll be exploring St. Joseph's rich history. In honor of that title, we've come to the top of Prospect Hill, just off of Prospect Avenue in St. Joseph. This is Fort Smith. It was built back in September of 1861 to protect St. Joseph during the Civil War. And while I wasn't able to talk to anyone who built the fort back then, I did chat with the team who unearthed it back in 2003.
I think I'd go back and say that Joe and I started the Civil War Roundtable Border War Society 40 years ago, something like that. But anyway, and that's where it came from, is we would have monthly meetings, and Sarah Elder came and made a presentation and talked about the existence of a fort like this.
It started with me presenting one of the programs that I have. It's called St. Joseph, A Town Divided. And it's just about St. Joseph during the Civil War. And I presented it to a group here in St. Joe that was around at the time called the Border War Society. And it was like-minded people who liked researching and studying about the Civil War and all that kind of good stuff. So I did this presentation, and that kind of sparked something in Bob Ford, who drove around based on the descriptions that I had from contemporary newspapers and county histories and things like that, to look to see if he could find maybe what was left of that.
That Sunday, Bob says, "Hey, I think I got something." And I said, "Well, let's skip church and go on up and look at it." And I went up here and said, "Boy, you got readouts. You got a fort." So, and then it all just kind of came from there.
According to geological surveys, this fort used to extend all the way back this direction to where Poulin Street is now. At some point between the Civil War and now, this land was graded so that houses could be built. This hill, as well as the entire city of St. Joseph, were extremely important to the Union Army during the beginning days of the Civil War.
At the start of the war, St. Joseph was very important. It was a commercial center. It was a communications center. It was kind of a military, not necessarily a center, but the United States didn't exist other than California and the coast between Missouri, the Missouri River, and California, that west. Kansas would become a state in 1861 in January, so it was just shortly after that the Civil War actually gets started. But again, it's a very young state at that point. So you have Kansas as part of the United States, but the railroad hadn't got there quite yet. So here's St. Joseph as the western terminus of the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad that connects back east. The telegraph is here. The Pony Express is still going, although almost done at that point. And much like the country, much like Missouri, was divided almost equally. And so that's when martial law got set. It was too important at the start of the war to have under Confederate control. The Union needed it to stay under Union control with the rest of the state.
The fort was built by the 16th Illinois Infantry, whose flag you can see here on my left. The city was under Union control for most of the Civil War, but despite that, it was an extremely divided city. The fort never saw much action proper, but there was fighting out in the streets of St. Joseph.
What a divided city we had. But from this viewpoint, you controlled the city, you controlled the river, and you controlled the trails that came into the city. So no, it didn't see action. Sterling Price and his Confederates went as far north in 61 as Lexington and won a battle there and turned around and went home thinking he would come back with even more troops. That first round he had 12,000 troops. I think the second round he had 20, but he wanted to come back with 50 and didn't quite get it.
There were fights in the streets. Union sympathizers, Southern sympathizers, Union soldiers against Southern sympathizers. So there was that kind of fighting. There's a letter, it's in I believe it's in the archives of the St. Joseph Museum, from a young man in Illinois unit who writes home to his sister around Christmas time. And he says, "There's a man or two killed here every day." And he's writing from St. Joe.
I think this right here has to be my favorite detail of the fort. In December of 1861, 2 of those cannons were fired over the city for target practice. Later, the mayor asked them to let them know next time they were going to test cannons so that they could evacuate women and children.
Well, they were doing practice shooting, and it really horrified the citizens. You know, as Bob was talking about the split city a few minutes ago, and everyone's kind of running for cover.
And there's a description of that. The first one, the cannonball went about halfway to the target, hit a street, hit a fence post, and ended up under the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad Depot. The second one, and I can't remember the exact description, but it's very good. It, again, went about halfway to the target, tore through a cupola of a livery stable on 4th Street, bounced outside, hit a fence post, went through a bowling alley, and then ended up under an outhouse.
The mayor came up afterwards and stated to Colonel Smith that the next time they want to test fire their cannons, please let the city know so women and children could evacuate the city.
And in case you're worried about any more target practice in the future, don't worry. These cannons are non-firing replicas. Unless, of course, someone decides to shoot a bottle rocket out of them on the 4th of July.
Well, that was the greatest experience of my life. To buy those cannons. As I found this company, I had a lot of Civil War magazines I subscribed to, and Steen Cannon, out of West Virginia, I believe. And I called him and I said, I've got some money to buy cannons. And I bought the 3 cannons, and it was $65,000. And, I'd never bought toys that expensive in my life. So I was absolutely thrilled. I knew what I wanted. I wanted a Napoleon and a 12-pounder Parrott. But people have had fun shooting bottle rockets out of them over the years. Bob and I've noticed.
Yeah,
and we would probably do the same if we were in our teens.
And while Houts has been able to invest heavily in the fort over the years, there's one thing he wishes he could do.
Let's fire cannon. If we could.
I'm glad it's here. It's a great view. I come up here on the 4th of July and watch the city explode. It's really a wonderful place. Glad it's here. Glad we pay attention to our history, because as we were saying, it's so unique than any other town really in the United States. And
for our size and our location, Bob's exactly right.
Come learn and enjoy.
You know, the old saying goes, he or she who forgets their past is bound to repeat it.
It gets said a lot and in various ways, those who do not remember their history are doomed to repeat it. And there's a lot of examples throughout history for that. There's also a truism that people don't vacation in their backyard, so they don't necessarily go to the places in their locale that will tell them their history. There's been any number of times I've talked to people like, well, I didn't know that about St. Joe. It's like, yeah, it's very important. It's not just, it was founded by, Joseph Robidoux, and as important as that is, obviously, and it's not all Pony Express and Jesse James, as important as those events are, because they are very important. But there's a whole 180 years worth of history of big moments and small that not necessarily, nobody really expects anybody to remember it all, but to at least remember it so it can be passed down, so it's not lost. Because, and on a lighter note, it comes in handy for trivia nights too. And at the end of the day, the best part of Fort Smith is the view of the entire city of St. Joseph. Reporting high and low in St. Joe, Sam Rowe, KQ2 News.